So we are talking about different ways of collecting qualitative data, maybe more rich and contextual information that's maybe not representative in the way that we would get from a random sample, but maybe gives us insights and value that doesn't require a large number of observations the way that random sampling does to get fairly reliable results. And so one of these techniques that gets used quite a bit is focus groups, and we'll talk a little bit about how they work and what they do. Focus groups are basically facilitated group interviews, right? So you get a group of people together and you have a person who kind of guides them through a conversation. And the point of that conversation is to get different perspectives, to get disagreements, to maybe give people a space to vent and talk about their feelings or their thoughts, their perspectives. Maybe there's some sort of active listening and encouraging people to talk. Maybe there's some pinging off of each other and that kind of a dynamic. And the idea is to create this sort of rich, deep level perspective from a small group of people that you can't really get at in a telephone survey, right? And so one of the ways that focus groups get used is to contextualize telephone surveys or telephone survey questions. In fact, this is one of the most useful things from my perspective, is to run a telephone survey through a focus group, because you have a question, you're not sure what to make of it, that, you know, you get people who answer it in ways that don't necessarily make intuitive sense, and you sit down with people and they tell you, and they talk through their thought process about why they answered a particular question a particular way, and suddenly you realize that you wrote the question in a way that you didn't necessarily anticipate how people were going to be reading it, or they didn't have some background knowledge, and so you're getting weird answers because your question was pinging off of people in ways you didn't anticipate. And focus groups are a great way to find that out really quickly and really cheaply. It also gives you an opportunity to dig in a little bit more deeply, to kind of get a sense of people's perspectives and maybe how strongly they feel about things or what's motivating particular answers. So that's really great in a social science context. It's also used widely in marketing. And so if you're a fan of the TV show Mad Men, they oftentimes have focus groups running in the background as part of the show. And this is sort of 1950s, 1960s, which is when focus groups really came into vogue as a research technique, and marketing and was at the forefront of that process. So if you're planning on setting up a focus group, you're probably going to want 7 to 12 people at a time. Getting more than that really can be kind of unwieldy. Depending on your topic, you may want a diverse variety of folks where they kind of ping off of each other to spark conversation. But you might also end up, again, depending on the topic, with people self-censoring. Like, I'm not really sure I get sort of the folks in this room. Maybe I'm not going to say a particular thing because I'm socially embarrassed. Maybe. Hopefully, you know, you're using anonymous people, or maybe not even anonymous, just people who don't necessarily know each other. And so maybe that reduces the sort of social desirability bias. But maybe you want to run different focus groups with more homogenous groups. Maybe you want men and women in separate focus groups. And so women are talking about their perspective without sort of self-censoring for men, and vice versa. Depending on your topic, you may want strangers. You may want family units where you get, you know, husband and wife couples sort of giving different perspectives and contrasting with each other, right? That can be really useful if you're, you know, asking questions about things like housework. Men tend to overestimate the amount of housework that they do, and women notice that men are overestimating the amount of housework that they do. Picking up that kind of a dynamic where you ask the question and then you get sort of pushback in the conversation amongst a couple can be useful. But I really don't have a good rule of thumb for this. In fact, a couple of years ago, I went to the library and grabbed sort of the classic sort of focus group book off the shelf and thought, you know, I'm really going to master this whole focus group. And what I came away with was focus groups are an art rather than a science, right? There's no one right way. There's no perfect focus group. Every situation is different and requires the researcher to kind of sit back and think about what he or she wants out of that process. It takes some skill to be able to navigate a group and sort of manage those conversations in a healthy, productive way where people are sort of doling out information in a more or less uncensored way. So again, if you want to go and do focus groups, I would encourage, as a research method, I would encourage first participating in a few, get a sense of how they run. Second, I would recommend sort of finding somebody to mentor you through focus group management, right? Participate as sort of an assistant, kind of get a sense of the feel of how they work. That seems to be how people get good at doing this. They get good at it by doing it in a sort of trial and error way in a supervised fashion. Um, so focus groups are not representative in the way that um, random sampling can give us a representative picture of the larger world, but they're also not authentic. When we were talking about sort of standards for good research and qualitative methods and with interviewing, I really hammered on this idea that you don't want to be excluding particular voices, that you need to get a sense that you've got a handle on all of the complexity and all the perspectives. And that if you don't have that, your data is biased, right? That unbiased data in a qualitative sense means you've captured all those different perspectives. It's authentic. But focus groups don't really do that. You're not going to see a diversity of perspectives. One, because people might be self-censoring. Two, because just loud people who kind of dominate the room, and other people kind of fall back. But also because you only got 7 to 12 people, and it's possible, maybe even likely, that your selection process brought in an unrepresented pool of 7 to 12 people. And so it's kind of hard to know exactly what makes focus groups a good research tool. And for a number of years, I always said, well, focus groups are beneficial because they're easy, right? You're going to find some things out and get outside your head, and you can do it in an afternoon, and it doesn't cost a whole lot. And so that's the appeal of focus groups. But I've come to revise that a little bit. And I came to revise it in part because I read an article by one of my colleagues, Paul Sum, and another colleague, Steve Light, where they were talking about focus groups that they ran, and how what focus groups did is help the researchers see the social consensus that was going on within a group. That as people are debating, you get a sense of how the community is wrestling with the topic. What are the arguments that resonate? What are the arguments that don't resonate? Who's sort of how a group is sort of conceptualizing a problem, right? And so somebody will bring something up and say, well, this is my perspective. And somebody else will say, no, you're an outsider. You moved in. You don't have that. You don't know the backstory. And you're like, oh, okay. Backstory is long history. Outsider perspective doesn't count. Like we've found something about how people are defining and thinking about the problem. And that's useful. Because I wouldn't necessarily have that coming in, having that sense of how a community is processing a problem. We could talk about that as intersubjective agreement, right? We're all bringing our own perspectives to the table, and we're sort of narrowing in on sort of the place where we all can kind of agree on how this is, or we're narrowing in on the disagreements. We're finding those real points where people diverge and trying to understand why that is. And so focus groups can be useful for that kind of a purpose. And again, depending on what you're interested in studying, this may be a useful thing to do. It may also be that you're better off with interviews, or you're better off with fieldwork, or you're better off with other kind of methods rather than focus groups. I want to finish by quickly flagging this thing called the Delphi method, which I don't think is traditionally considered a focus group, but I consider it a focus group. And I think it's actually a really innovative twist on sort of the focus group, and that idea of we're going to narrow in on the consensus. So we're going to use this focus group to kind of grind through the complexity of the problem. And so the Delphi method is typically run with experts, right? So it's a reference to the Greek oracle of Delphi, right? You go to this oracle, and the oracle gives you wisdom, right? So the idea is that you go to experts, and the experts give you wisdom. And so maybe you start out by giving experts a questionnaire, or sitting down doing an interview with them, and you request predictions. Like, what do you think is going to happen in the future? Or how is this problem going to play out? And so you take all of those expert perspectives, and you bring them back, and you sit down with them, and you go through and you sort of summarize and sort of see sort of where's the consensus, sort of where's the divergence. 7 people thought this was going to happen, 4 people thought this was going to happen. And then you go back to people. So unlike a focus group, right, this isn't like we're all sitting down at the table. This is something that happens iteratively over time. So you're going back to these people, and you're saying, okay, so I talked to a bunch of people who are experts and smart like you, and 7 people thought you were wrong. And here's the arguments that they gave. And would you like to change your answer, given that other people think you're wrong? And here are their reasons. And it might be that the expert says, yeah, I was just kind of, shooting off my mouth, and I no longer really believe what I said, and I find those arguments persuasive, and mark me down as switching over, and here's the arguments that were persuasive to me. Or they say, no, those people are wrong. In fact, they don't know what they're talking about, and they're missing this and this and this and this and this. And that's why their predictions are false or incorrect or indefensible. Oh, okay, you say. Well, now I'm going to take that rigorous defense and I'm going to go to that majority group, that group of 7, and one by one, I'm saying, there are people who disagree with your perspective, and these are their arguments. And does that change your perspective? Do you think you're right? Do you think that when you consider those other factors that you want to shift your prediction? And so you go back and forth, and you continue this process until you have either convergence, right? Everybody sort of reaches a point where they all agree, which is, a rare thing among experts. There's the joke about economists, and it says you line them up end to end all the way to the sun, and they still wouldn't reach a conclusion. But the idea is that you might reach consensus through this process, or you're going to hone in on 2 distinct lines of reasoning, or 3 or 4 distinct lines of reasoning. And that's really valuable, that there's an argument to be made here that this is what's going to happen and this is how things are going to play out. But there's a dissenting argument as well. And both are plausible, both are grounded in social science theory, both have data behind them, and we can sort of summarize those arguments and use those as sort of the output from that Delphi process, that we've got not 1 prediction, but 2, but both predictions sort of have some real merit behind them and are rigorous and have been tested against sort of different perspectives and considered against different perspectives. So again, the Delphi method isn't traditionally considered a focus group, but I like the idea of you're working with a group of people to churn through a conversation that's mediated, right? You, the person running the group, is sort of mediating that conversation, but doing that in a way that helps to sort of figure out where are the lines of consensus within that group.